Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this Wednesday afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining us from. We're thrilled to have with us the fifth provost in the history of Notre Dame. She is not quite with us full-time now, 3 months, although really when she was appointed back in March, she's been working full-time since then, given all of the demands of the particular moment. So I'm really grateful that during a very difficult week, on top of the 80 to 90 hour weeks that she's been working, this is the week that Marie Lynn and her husband, Chris, are actually moving all of their belongings to a farm just south of campus. So it's been extra busy. So thank you, Marie Lynn, for making time to be with us today. Last time we spoke in this format was just before the academic year began. And we were looking for your projections on how things would go, especially as related to COVID-19. We've received lots of questions from Notre Dame parents in particular about how we're managing the COVID-19 crisis. And so I thought maybe we could begin and you could give us an update on how things are going on campus that, coronavirus related.
So I'm happy to do that. And Lou, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with the group today. It's always a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you, and all the better when we have friends of the university out there listening in as well. So we have a public dashboard. I'm guessing that many people have been following that dashboard and can see that our numbers, we had that big peak during August 17th to the 19th. Which was quite worrisome. We, as I like to say, we stumbled. We were down on the ground, and then the question was, are we going to get back up, or are we going to stay on the ground? And I think a number of universities chose to stay on the ground, sent their kids home, etc. But that didn't feel like a very Notre Dame thing to do, to just stay on the ground. So I think we worked really hard. The students worked really hard, and faculty and staff worked really hard to get ourselves stood back up again. So we had that 2-week cooling down period for undergraduate classes. Graduate classes continued in the classroom. And a lot of that was about strengthening our systems to test students, to manage quarantine and isolation, to get past that big peak that we had. And right now, we seem to have come through that peak. The daily numbers, as you can see on our public dashboard, our daily numbers are quite low. We would, of course, always prefer for there to be 0 cases, but the numbers are quite low. We're doing a whole lot more testing right now. So the amount of diagnostic testing, so kids who show up at the stadium, feeling unwell, we call that diagnostic testing. Those numbers have gone down, so that's a good sign. But the amount of surveillance testing has gone up. And I know surveillance testing is kind of a funny word. Surveillance sort of smacks of, people, big brother watching you. But surveillance testing, it's actually a term that comes out of public health, where, so for example, we do surveillance testing for childhood lead exposure, something that I do a lot of work on myself. And it's a way for us to get a handle on who's getting exposed where and get in and intervene quickly to protect those kids. And similarly, surveillance testing for COVID-19, we structure random samples of students, faculty, and staff with a real focus on students, since that's where we're seeing our cases. And we test people, whether they have symptoms or not. And actually, usually they don't have symptoms, because otherwise they go to diagnostic testing, to see whether or not they're asymptomatic carriers. And moving in quickly at that point allows us to protect the community from community-wide spread. And I know there are a lot of questions about how we pick who gets involved in surveillance testing. I certainly get emails from parents and students about that. And the way that it works is that we take a random, so let's focus on student surveillance. We take a random sample of students. So I'm a statistician, right? So we worked really hard to figure out what would constitute a random sample of students. That means that it's a mix of off-campus and on-campus. It's a mix of men and women. It's a mix across all of the residence halls, et cetera. And then we randomly put them in, in an order, and then we move through and say, okay, we're gonna, this week we're gonna take the first, or this day we're gonna ask the first 300 students on that list to show up, and then the next day, the next 300 students, and the next day, the next 300 students. And there's only been a couple of exceptions to that. So sometimes when we're worried about a particular dormitory, we might say, well, we're seeing a few cases in this residence hall. So within this random sample, let's find all the people who are from that residence hall and move them up a little bit in priority. But that just means that they got called on Tuesday instead of the fact that they might have otherwise gotten called on Friday to come in for surveillance testing. Right. So sometimes we move people up in the list on this like scroll of random samples. And there have been a couple of occasions. Once we had a lot of students positive in a short period of time, a lot. We had 9 students positive in a short period of time from one residence hall. And we asked all the students in that residence hall to come for surveillance testing so that we could make sure that there wasn't community spread, that it wasn't, we weren't looking at the possibility of a huge outbreak in the dorm. And then the only other time when we've targeted a particular group is that we had a faculty member who was diagnosed positive. Of course, we have to look really closely at any situation where we're worried about classroom transmission. Right. So in that particular instance, we asked all the students who were enrolled in that class to go ahead and come in and get tested. And we were reassured, while we can't say, as a scientist, I can't say definitively the transmission didn't occur in the classroom. We were very reassured from the surveillance testing. We didn't get any positives out of that, things were okay. So our numbers are low. Our surveillance testing program is going really well. And I'm feeling, I'm knocking on wood as I say this, even though I'm a scientist, I'm knocking on wood, cautiously optimistic that we are going to successfully make it through the fall semester, and we've learned a lot this semester, and we'll be better positioned for how we handle things in the spring semester.
And it seems that you are always monitoring new breakthroughs in COVID-19 testing and treatments, and recently it appears that you have kind of pioneered a new form of surveillance testing, right? The saliva testing, and you've tapped into some of our own faculty expertise. Can you there were a few questions about saliva testing and what that will allow us to do to be able to test more.
Yeah, so this is technology. So usually when you test for COVID-19, you take a nasal swab. That's a little bit invasive. It can be a little bit uncomfortable. It's usually a little bit better if you have a medical personnel administering it instead of self-administered. But saliva, on the other hand, this is a saliva test that was developed at the University of Illinois. We have very strong partnerships. Our School of Engineering has very strong partnerships with with faculty at the University of Illinois. And so we signed a non-disclosure agreement with the University of Illinois, and they gave us everything that we needed to set up a saliva testing laboratory here on our campus. I have this fantastic faculty member named Mike Frender, who's leading that effort for us, and an incredible team of people. So Mike Frender is leading the laboratory where the saliva samples are actually being evaluated. And then we have the whole team that figures out who do we call in for surveillance testing, how do we set up the place where people, spit in a tube. I like to call it ND spits. And so there's this amazing woman from Notre Dame Research named Liz Ruley, who is leading that effort for us, coordinating with the data people, coordinating with the laboratory people. We have 40 student ambassadors who are working shifts in the saliva tent, as we call it. And what this means is that we will soon be able to test a whole lot more people on a daily basis. And that just helps us get a better handle on how and where and when the virus has managed to penetrate the campus. And if you can swoop in quickly, get the right people in quarantine, do good contact tracing right away, then you get much better outcomes for the campus.
Fantastic. That sounds like a really important and a wonderful breakthrough, that new partnership with the University of Illinois and our own faculty being involved in that. So I know there were a lot of concerns about this first football weekend against Duke. And, we have a history, a tradition where there's a lot of tailgating and parties surrounding the game itself. Any initial assessment on how things went with that first football weekend?
Well, I want to give a big shout out to the people in, Mike Siemens, who runs all game day operation, Shannon Cullinan, who had teams of people working on all kinds of different things, student affairs that did a lot of programming and talking with students about what are interesting, safe, and fun activities that you would go to try to avoid those things. We made the decision that there wasn't going to be any tailgating, and the only people in the stadium were people who are regularly on campus, so students, faculty, and staff. And so I want to, give a big shout out to the athletics department that, in making a decision about who was going to be in the stadium, really prioritizing our own students, and this whole notion of we have students on the field and students in the stands. And I really thank and am grateful for the way that the athletics department has dealt with the whole question of ticket sales. So our first football game is in the books. It was a really different environment. There wasn't any tailgating. There weren't any open containers on campus. If you saw photographs, if people who were watching saw photographs, the students were spread out. They were allowed to sit with their roommates in pods. Everybody had to wear a mask. For the most part, it seemed that people were wearing their masks. There was a little bit of clustering every now and then. It's hard to resist your friends sometimes, but for the most part, people paid attention to the rules about being spread out. There were 15,000 people in the stadium. Lou, as you know, I spent 21 years on the faculty at Duke, and my joke about it, I texted a few of my Duke friends and said, 15,000 people in the stadium, looks like a Duke game for sure. That being a basketball school. But, it went well, and we learned some things. We'll get better for the game coming up this weekend. And for those of you who just heard that I spent 21 years at Duke, and I have a daughter who goes there, in case you're wondering whether I had split loyalties, I was very clearly rooting for Notre Dame and was really happy with the win. So, that was a great, for how hard our players have been working and all the complications introduced into their practice schedule and into their lives by COVID-19. I just feel a lot of pride in those young men who said, this is part of our development. This is part of who we are. We're going to figure out a way to stay safe and play together as a team. And they brought home a victory for Notre Dame. So that's a great thing.
That's fantastic. Well, one of the things I think is really clear to all of us around here is that the nature of this virus is that the actions of a few can undermine the fate of the many. And so we need to stay vigilant, right? As we go through the rest of the season, the rest of the semester. I know a lot of folks and a lot of messaging is going on from all different areas of the university to follow the health protocols, whether you're students, faculty, staff, or if you happen to be visiting as parents, for a weekend. And so we'll try to keep that messaging as clearly and forcefully out there as possible. But you've said from the beginning that this pandemic, which is really unprecedented, certainly in our lifetimes, and this pandemic is something that we just don't want to survive.
That's right.
But we want to use this pandemic as something that can be transformative, that can kind of galvanize our efforts and have a lasting impact on how we become better as a university, better as a community.
That's right.
What are some signs of that you see now that may have a transformative impact on Notre Dame and society?
Yeah, well, so Lou, this is a great question. People oftentimes will ask me, so what keeps you up at night? You're managing through a global pandemic. What keeps you up at night? And of course, nothing keeps me up at night. That is my superpower, that I'm able to sleep well no matter what's going on. It really helped when we were raising kids. I could wake up, nurse them, go right back to sleep, and be just fine.
Yeah.
But my biggest concern is that we'll get through the academic year, and at the end of the academic year, we'll realize, oh, all we did this year was survive COVID. So we have other priorities, and I'm happy to talk about what those other priorities are. But even within the realm of handling COVID, I think it's really important that COVID can be all consuming, but we have to pay attention both to the urgent and the important, and make sure that at the end of the year we've paid sufficient attention to the important. And I'm happy if you want to talk about other priorities to talk about that. But within the context of COVID, we should make sure that everything that we're doing related to COVID, we have a mind to, can we use this, the decisions we're making here, can we use this to make ourselves a bigger, stronger, better, faster university? So for example, we've learned a lot about dual delivery, how you teach students in the classroom and some students who are learning remotely at the same time. Now, and imagine a situation, we have an incredible commitment to ensuring that our students are global citizens, right? Citizens of the world. And a huge proportion of our undergraduates go overseas at some point or another. Now, the groups that are less likely to go overseas are students in science and engineering, not because they're less interested in going overseas, but because the sequencing of their coursework is so complicated. So imagine if we use this dual delivery and identified a few critical courses that if we offered those dual delivery, we would open up opportunities for students in science and engineering to also take advantage of study abroad. So that's an example where we could be stronger. We've learned a lot about our data systems and how well and how poorly our data systems talk to each other. And that's been true for like the testing that we've done, but then start thinking about what if we use this as an opportunity to integrate our data systems better so that we have a clear sense of what students' interests are, how we might match them up with faculty interests, getting them into research mentorship opportunities, et cetera. So we could have stronger data systems to support that student experience. We have COVID-19 this year. Every year we have flu, seasonal flu, right? And we've learned some things about protecting people from the spread of COVID, all of which are relevant for protecting people from the spread of seasonal flu. So can we keep our students healthier in the residence halls through some of the things we've learned from COVID-19? That I gave the example of students getting involved in the saliva sampling. So there are these 40 students. I think the vast majority of them are pre-health. So they're in this situation where it's a brand new technology helping us to understand this disease. They're working directly with quote unquote patients, right? They're not really patients. They're members of our community who are giving saliva samples. And some people feel very positive about doing that. Some people not so positive. So they're having that experience as well. And then the last thing I would say about how do we make, this, everything that we're doing, like we're struggling through something really hard together. And that has the potential at the end to make us more fractured as a community. Or it has the potential at the end to make us stronger and tighter and more cohesive as a community. And I think we have to keep an eye on that all the time, whether it's with the faculty, with the graduate students, with the undergraduate students, with our staff, both the student-facing staff and the academic staff, all of those. We have to make sure that the experience of going through COVID together makes our community stronger.
Right. That's an excellent point because, hopefully we can use this force to bond us together ever more tightly and not let it fracture us. But there are pressures. Things are very politically charged in our society today and terribly divisive. And And this pandemic seems to have exacerbated a lot of the challenges that are perennially with us. Talk to us about a new initiative that you are leading, kind of in response to some of the challenges that we're facing as a global community, as well as a national community. Can you talk a little bit about a big vision that you have?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. It seems this is a moment where the finest part of Notre Dame, the finest parts of Notre Dame can really get highlighted. So Pope Francis gave an interview to Commonweal magazine some number of months ago, where they were interviewing him about the coronavirus, because he had his stay home orders as well, and wasn't doing public visitations or public masses for a while. And people were interviewing him about, what are you doing? How are you handling your time? And how do you think about COVID-19 and your Catholics around the world? And in this article, he used this phrase. He talked about how he was handling it, and he talked about how he was praying a lot for people all over the world. And he also talked about how he used this phrase, "This is the moment to see the poor." He talked about the longstanding inequalities that have characterized our world, and that Catholic social teaching tells us that we have a responsibility to address those. And while those inequalities have existed for a long time, COVID-19 laid them bare in a way that was very hard to miss. And so he talked about this moment to see the poor as a singular time where we are called to focus on these inequalities. Well, then the leaders of the pontifical academies wrote an editorial for Science magazine, and it was called "Moment to See." And in it, they quote Pope Francis, but they also it was a comment, this essay, which is just fantastic. I recommend it to everyone, and certainly to every Catholic to read. They talk about revealing these inequalities. They talk about how we are called as humans to act on these inequalities. So they didn't just call on members of the Catholic Church, they called on all of society, although you could hear Catholic social teaching resonating in the language that they use in this editorial. And then they also talk about specific actions that we could all be taking. So I was spending a lot of time thinking about this and talking with the deans and saying, lots of universities are going to have speaker series or something like that around the inequalities that have been revealed. But, this feels like it could be an issue around which Notre Dame really engages in a much more significant way. We think about our curriculum, we think about our research program. And one of the people participating in those conversations was Father Jerry Ollinger, and he brought to my attention the second Constitution of the Holy Cross Order. And in it, it talks about the order's responsibility to develop in people the capacity to understand and the courage to act. And those things ended up getting put together. So moment to see, courage to act. And the idea behind this is we are looking at ways that we can infuse the curriculum with opportunities for students to reflect on these inequalities, but also to form action plans, like what is going to be different in their life? How are they going to serve the world? How do we bring Catholic social teaching? How do we bring that to life in very real ways for our students, for our faculty, for all the staff that work at the university? So we have a series of programming planned, some of which are discussions to get people reading these things. It's actually not a lot of text, but reading these things. Lou, I'm hoping you'll let me do a few of these discussion groups with some alums or other friends of the university. So have these discussion groups, start thinking about the curriculum. We're thinking about a moment to see, courage to act. I forget. I think it's a way of knowing. I think that's what we call it in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about research programs. We're talking about maybe national or global convenings around this whole idea that we will come out of the pandemic different. There's no going back to whatever we were like before the pandemic. And then, the question is, will we come out of the pandemic better?
Mm-hmm.
And will we come out of the pandemic with a greater commitment to those who are less fortunate, or those most disadvantaged, or those most vulnerable in our world? Will we come out of the pandemic with better programs to serve those people? Will Notre Dame be part of all of the solutions that are needed for the difficult problems that our world faces right now?
That's a beautiful, beautiful framework, Marie Lynn. This moment to see, courage to act. There's so many biblical references, right, to blindness and denial. And for so many of us, it's difficult to just take the moment to see, first of all, the realities around us, the needs, the injustices, etc. But then also to be inspired to act, to have that courage to act. Yep. It's a great framework. What are some, so expect to hear a lot more about moment to see and courage to act going forward. What are some of the other priorities when you think beyond the pressing challenges of COVID-19? What are some things that you're beginning to discuss that you see as big priorities for Notre Dame going forward?
Sure. So I've mentioned previously that we need to strengthen the research environment at Notre Dame. Part of that has to do with, and that's across the board, make it as easy as possible for faculty to fully engage in their scholarship. Mm-hmm. When faculty are freed up to really fully engage in their scholarship, they're much more likely to have time to fully engage students in that scholarship with them. So improving the research environment isn't just good for the faculty, it's really good for our students as well. Another thing is working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we are thinking about how do we create a more diverse community here at the university, and at the same time ensure that when people come here, they have a good experience. So it's not just a question of getting them in the door, it's a question of what's the experience that they have here. I'm putting a pretty big emphasis on strengthening graduate and professional education programs. Then the last thing I would say is this is part of that, how do we become bigger, stronger, better, faster post-COVID? How do we reimagine undergraduate education in a post-COVID world? Are there things that we want to change about the curriculum? Are there things that we want to, I think for a long time, we've had a curriculum and extracurriculars, finding more of a curriculum and a co-curriculum. So we see tighter connections between what students are doing in and outside the classroom. Those sorts of things are part of what I'm thinking about in terms of reimagining undergraduate education post-pandemic. I shouldn't say I'm thinking about, we are all collectively with the deans, department chairs, faculty across campus.
Right. One of the things you mentioned is strengthening graduate and professional programs. Notre Dame has been a place historically that has been steeped in that undergraduate experience. I know that there's some fears out there that if we're to follow the pattern of a number of schools and really focus more on graduate and professional education, that it will somehow take away from the commitment to the undergraduate educational experience. What are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing I would say, Lou, you and I both have multiple children. And when your second child was born, you didn't love your first child less. You found enough love in your heart for your second child and your third child. I stopped at 3, but I know you have more than 3 children. So, there's plenty of love in our hearts, and there's plenty of we have institutional resources to better serve graduate and professional students. But most importantly of all, strong graduate programs are really good for undergraduates for a variety of reasons. Number one, if you have strong graduate programs, you are much more likely to be able to attract the very best faculty. And those faculty teach our undergraduates. So strong graduate programs mean stronger faculty for our undergraduates and our graduate students. Secondly, when you have strong graduate students, so especially in the sciences and engineering, but also in the social sciences and humanities, you have these really strong graduate students who provide additional sources of mentorship for our undergraduate students. So in my research lab, for example, I have undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, I have full-time people, and we're, it's this vertical integration where there's a lot of mentorship that goes up and down the ladder. And that doesn't mean that I'm still paying attention to the undergraduates, but the undergraduates get the benefit of the graduate students and the postdocs and the full-time research staff, their mentorship as well. So that's another thing that's really good for undergraduates. And the third thing is that our reputation, I'm not a big fan of rankings, but we know that people's perceptions of the university are, some people pay a lot of attention to rankings. We know that a key part of rankings are how the outside world perceives Notre Dame. So when we have stronger graduate programs, the outside world, who is part and parcel of shaping these rankings, thinks more highly of Notre Dame. So you actually, if you have stronger graduate programs, you increase the value of the undergraduate's degree. So you get better faculty, you get more mentorship, and you increase the value of an undergraduate degree from the university. So for me, strengthening graduate programs is good for our undergraduates. And also we have enough love in our hearts for all of those students.
No, that's great. I think, like you say, there's a huge synergy between the two, and one complements the other. I remember a few years back that we were one of two finalists for a huge hire, and for a faculty member who in the end chose to go elsewhere because the breadth and depth of our graduate program in his area didn't allow for the number and quality of students that he needed to basically manage his lab, his research agenda. And so we lost out for that reason, and ultimately it was a huge loss for our undergraduate students as well. So I see this dual commitment to both undergraduate and graduate students, as well as our professional students, as all being tied together as one. You've also talked about a real focus on data science and data literacy. Everything seems to be moving in that direction in our society. How do you hope to make those themes more relevant for our undergraduate students?
Yeah, so we're living in a very data-driven world. There's so much data flowing out of everything right now, whether it's you put in your phone number at the grocery store and the grocery stores are tracking what you're buying, and it's no accident that these particular coupons get printed out for you. So in our everyday lives, there's all this data that is influencing what we come in contact with, who we get information from, and so making sure that our students understand the way that those data flows are shaping society. And making sure that our students can be intelligent consumers of what we're learning through data science, but also intelligent consumers of all the signals that are getting thrown at them by this data-driven world that they're living in seems quite important. So we have a variety of different things going on. We have the Lucy Institute for Data and Society. We're really grateful to the Lumpkins family for their endowment of that institute. I had a wonderful conversation with the Lumpkins. So the Lucy Institute is named after their granddaughter, and it was a little bit of a risk, but I mentioned to them that our younger dog, our puppy, her name is also Lucy, so I have a special fondness. So it's a data science institute and it's named Lucy, so I have a special fondness for it. Luckily, their granddaughter is also a redhead, so they like the fact that our puppy is named Lucy. So there's the Lucy Institute for Data and Society, which will be offering research opportunities for students. We'll be helping to foster collaborations across faculty for us to address key problems. And we also are working to ensure that the data science minor is strong and we have the right kinds of faculty for that, as well as a data science major. And we're doing a lot of hiring. So this year these are positions that despite in terms of faculty hiring, you really cannot afford, as tough as the budget is, you really cannot afford as a university to hold back on faculty hiring. So we have 15 data science positions that we'll be hiring into over the course of the next year to 3 years. And we're being very clear to the world, instead of announcing it one position at a time, we're making this announcement that we're making a big investment in data science that will allow us to get better people, knowing that they'll have a whole cohort that's coming in together. And that allows us to provide better opportunities to both undergraduate students and graduate students to develop that data literacy. And I mean that, not just for people in science and engineering, but, people in the humanities or in the social sciences, both for them to understand their disciplines better, but also to just function in the world as an intelligent consumer and as an engaged citizen. So I'll stop there. I could go on for a long time about data science, as you know.
Exactly. Well, that's those sound like some really pioneering initiatives. You've also talked about the importance of research, and in Notre Dame's roughly 178-year history, Father Soren established us thinking about being a force for good in society. And for most of those years, it was graduating terrific people that can go out and make a difference in society in a multitude of ways. But increasingly, it's also, how can our research make a difference in the world? How can our research help to solve different medical riddles and help people from a health perspective, perhaps a public health perspective, or to build better societies, or to assist with conflict resolution? So many different ways, alternative forms of energy. What is your vision for really enhancing the STEM initiative, science and engineering, and technology and math, those areas? Why is this important? What do you hope to do?
Yeah, it's strong of a university as Notre Dame is. I think that we are underinvested in science and engineering relative to our aspirations. So we want to be a global university that's having an impact across all the fields in which we are involved. So we are underinvested relative to our aspirations, and I'm not interested in lowering our aspirations.
Right.
So and part of those aspirations is exactly as you said. What do we hope to offer the world? What does our university offer the world in terms of solutions to problems, insights, and as you said, it's not just like, how do we get clean water? It's, what do we learn about behavior that helps us get at conflict resolution and those sorts of things. But within STEM, I would say that we need to make some investments in facilities. So that means renovating some of the laboratory facilities that we already have, as well as potentially expanding the square footage available for science and engineering laboratories. There's a huge need for computational infrastructure. This whole entry of streams of data into the world has hit science and engineering even more so than any other place. So the computational infrastructure needs to be built for that. Hiring some additional faculty to make sure that we have good coverage of the kinds of fields we want to be involved in, and picking some strategic areas where we say we're going to become one of the best places in the world in these areas, and making serious investments. Increasing collaboration. So we have I've been spending a lot of time thinking, for example, about the College of Science because of Mary Galvin's announcement that she was going to step down. And we need to make sure that within departments, people are talking to each other, but also across departments within the College of Science, people are talking to each other, but also between the College of Science and the College of Engineering, that we're looking at collaborations there, because that's certainly where the vast majority of funding is in these multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches. And it's not just science and engineering collaborating with each other, it's also what are some of the ethical dimensions of what's going on in science and engineering. So we have all this work being done on vaccine development.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets the vaccine first? Mm-hmm. That is a question that we need to engage our humanists in. Like, how do we think about the allocation of the vaccine? We need our humanists and our social scientists engaged in those questions. So more multidisciplinary research across science and engineering, with some outreach to, the other schools, the Keough School, Arts and Letters, the law school, the business school, et cetera. And there are some aspects of the financial model that need to be addressed. So I'll give an example of this. So when a new faculty member comes and they need a particular piece of equipment, we could start thinking about having a shared equipment facility where we say, okay, you need the very best pen in the world. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get you the very best pen in the world. By the way, these are the very best pens in the world. We're going to get you the very best pen in the world. But this faculty member who's down the hall, they're going to need to use that pen a couple of weeks out of the year. So you're not going to be using that pen every day. We want you to share that equipment. And I love the idea of building something like this and putting faculty in charge of it, so that faculty come together, they discuss what are the equipment needs across all of the different fields of inquiry that are going on in the STEM fields. And they prioritize. They say, okay, well, we have a budget for X number of dollars per year to invest in equipment. Any equipment that we buy goes into this shared facility so that multiple people can use it. They're making decisions and prioritizations around it. So you're sort of lighting on fire faculty ideas and creativity and empowering them to grow the university and grow the research portfolio. So the bottom line is that science and engineering programs are expensive. Lou, any help you can, can give us in that regard is much appreciated. The other thing is that good science and engineering programs are good for the whole university. When Mary Galvin said to me a long time ago, it feels like I've been here a long time.
Exactly.
When I was first interviewing here, she said, we cannot have the ethical voice we want unless we are strong technically. So if we have stronger science and engineering, there will be more voice for all of our faculty across the university. So, Mary Galvin's been a great leader for the College of Science. I am really focused on making sure that we get another great dean for the College of Science and one who will work collaboratively across schools.
Fantastic. Excellent insights across the board, although you lost me at the point of the pen. I want to get, that best pen in the world. I want to make sure I get a few of those for my office over here. But
I have some in my desk. I'm going to get you a couple.
Okay, good. That's terrific. One of the things I know that you are committed to is our Catholic character, which is what makes us distinct. It's something that we all know we need to be eternally vigilant about. But the challenges of the day have made it so that we need to also think very seriously about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so can you tell us a little bit on diversity and inclusion? What are some initiatives that you're thinking about now to help Notre Dame pivot and adjust to the challenges of the moment?
One of the things that I love about Notre Dame is the fact that people, when they're trying to make decisions about medium-sized issues and certainly about big issues, and a lot of times about small issues too, they go straight to the mission statement. And when I first saw the mission statement, when I was thinking about applying for this job, our mission statement is really long. And I thought, I'm used to mission statements that are 3 or 4 sentences long. And I found that a little like, why do they have such a long mission statement? Now that I'm here, I realize because people go to the mission statement all the time, and they, you know, they're discerning from the mission statement how to handle complex situations. And that, I think when we look at how the university is trying to tackle diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a lot of wisdom in that mission statement about the Catholic nature of the university. And this is further strengthened by this pastoral letter that the American College of Catholic Bishops issued a couple of years ago that highlights racial injustice as a great stain on all of our souls, as well as a call to action, and that as Catholics, we are called to address racial injustice. Mm-hmm. And so there are any number of there's all kinds of courses we could be teaching to help educate our students. There are research problems we could be working on, but it also means that we have to think harder about diversity, equity, and inclusion on our own campus. So there's a lot of goodwill around this. And I think one of the reasons there's a lot of goodwill is that we have a very thoughtful, clear mission statement that people are very committed to. So the desire to create a more diverse environment and a welcoming environment is fully discernible from the mission statement. So there's great commitment. And now we're in the process of building, you know, making sure people have the toolkit that they need. So I've already had, Father John and I have already had conversations with Don Bishop about what strategies do we employ to continue to recruit an outstanding group of undergraduates to our university while increasing the diversity amongst those undergraduates. In the case of faculty and graduate students, I'm really fond of using this phrase, well, don't just eat the fish that wash up on the beach, go fishing, which has, you know, great biblical metaphors as well, right? So you don't wait for people to come to you. You get really active with graduate students and with faculty, go out, try to find these students, or try to find these faculty. So the example that I'll give, we have Father Bob Sullivan who helps us. We want to, part of ensuring the Catholicity of the university is making sure that we have a significant number of Catholic faculty. So he has an operation that looks at the Catholicity of potential candidates. So, and that usually happens after a pool of candidates have been identified through a search process. So what I asked him to do was, could you go and look at every single one of the National Science Foundation career winners? So the career award are sort of like the preeminent awards for rising stars, assistant professors. And can you look at everybody who won that award in the past 3 years, and let's find out, you know, run your algorithms. Can you find out for us which of those faculty are Catholic? But while you're at it, can you add to your algorithm some information on whether or not they are faculty of color? So he did his first set of analyses on all of these. And now we've gone fishing, right? We've identified within all of these NSF Career Award winners, who are some of the people who we'd really like to attract to the campus. So we can proactively, when we have position openings, when we're searching in the Department of Biology, or we're searching in the Department of History, or we're searching in the Physics Department, we can proactively say, so here are some candidates that we know are really good because they won these, well, in science and engineering, the NSF Career Awards. There are other awards you can look at in other fields. We know they're really good. We know whether or not they're Catholic. We know whether or not they're underrepresented minorities, and we can proactively recruit them to come into our pool. So each of our colleges and schools has developed a diversity and inclusion plan, and probably most important, we want to make sure it's not just bringing people in. We want to make sure that the people who we bring in have a good experience.
Mhm.
And we have rigorous ways to measure that. So we're using survey work, we're holding ourselves accountable against our numbers, but also accountable against the numbers that are coming out of our surveys regarding the experience people have when they're here on campus.
Great. One final question, Marie Lynn, and that is that as we break from our interview today, my understanding is that that you're going to be going over to the Fortune Student Center, and you're going to begin to have just open office hours that anybody can stop by to, students, faculty, staff, whatever issues that they'd like to speak with you about. This kind of open door policy is pretty refreshing, pretty unique. I imagine you've done this elsewhere, but could you say a little bit about your philosophy behind that and any closing thoughts you might have?
Sure. So it's all about, high levels of communication and transparency and accessibility. So I did open office hours when I was a dean at Michigan, when I was a provost at Rice, and now here at Notre Dame. And the whole point of it is that anybody in the university community can come and talk to me about whatever's on their mind.
Mhm.
And what it does is it sort of lowers the bar for people. Like when they want me to know something, they kind of think about, is it worth it to ask for time on my calendar? And they worry, oh, she's busy, she's this. Does this really rise to that? And it's sort of like, don't worry about that. Just come visit me during office hours. It's open. And so I learn an enormous amount about the university. We have some things that come in that are like, oh, I had no idea about that. We can fix that right away. Let's get that taken care of. Or, oh, that's a great idea. Let's make that happen right away. Other things that are more complicated that, I need to do some investigating and learn some more things. But and I always try to follow up with whoever comes and sees me during office hours. And honestly, it's really nice. The main building is beautiful. The Golden Dome is beautiful. The artwork in this building is beautiful. But it's really nice to go out, go somewhere else, meet people where they're hanging out, as opposed to through this Zoom box that we're all on all the time. So when you're going to a place that's accessible to everyone, as opposed to receiving people in your office, it changes the dynamic in the conversation. And I really like that too.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again. As the father of five, that seems to be all I really do is repeat myself, anyways. And that is that I think it's simply providential that you are here at Notre Dame in this role at this time, and the experience that you bring with you from Duke, from Harvard, from Michigan, from Rice to this role is all to the benefit of Notre Dame. And so we're really grateful that you're here and you're taking on the leadership role of our entire academy and all academic efforts and beyond. So we're really excited. I wanted to just thank you, Marie Lynn, and I want to mention to everyone who's joined us today that we're going to be joined next week, same time, same place, by Mickey Kidder, who is our Vice President for Business Enterprises. She oversees, in special events, she oversees the bookstore, the Morris Inn, food services, game day, things of that nature. And as we always do, wherever you are, in your workplace or at home, we'd like to close with a prayer to our patroness, Notre Dame, and we'll all share in a Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Take care, God bless, and go Irish. Thank you. Stay safe.
Irish.